Hello, everybody, and welcome back to highpowergaming.com. And we're very pleased to welcome tonight a long-time wargamer, blogger, YouTuber, and now podcaster, new media phenomenon, founder of Yarkshire Gamer, Ken Reilly. Hello, Ken.
Hello there. You're making me sound like some sort of media mogul there. I've got all those things, but I haven't got the Rolls Royce and the villa in the Maldives, unfortunately.
It's only a matter of time, Ken. I'm sure.
I'm sure. Because everyone makes a living out of wargaming, don't they?
So I believe amongst these more popular podcasts, that the trend now is to have quite a short section for your bio.
Well, that's something I've introduced because look, I love him to death, Henry Hyde, but he can do a 50-minute intro, and then the poor lad whose podcast it is or interview has got like 30 seconds at the end to. Yeah, and our main topic. Oh, thank you, Henry. Good night. So, my friend Chris, who did an interview with Henry, had to split it into two parts, each an hour and a half long. So, if Henry ever does come on one of my podcasts, he's going to have to cope with doing it in 4 minutes, which I'm limiting everyone to.
You got the first 5 years. Just up to
yeah, exactly. I'll get up to the bit where he's painted his first plastic figure, and then it'll have to end.
Well, go on then, Ken. Well, obviously there's it's that unavoidable question.
Yeah.
In 4 minutes, or indeed less, tell us a little about yourself and your journey into wargaming.
Yeah, no worries. I would describe myself very simply as part of the Airfix generation. And as a young lad, I'd go down the shops with me pound pocket money or whatever and buy a box of soldiers or a Spitfire or a Messerschmitt or whatever. And then we would just roll marbles at them in the bedroom. And then as an only child, I kind of got into gaming myself through reading the Airfix magazine, I think it was, did a set of books. They did World War II and English Civil War and all that sort of stuff. And I was literally solo gaming at the age of maybe 11 or 12 with this book and these figures. And massive lover of history as well, so I was reading around everything, and then one day around probably 13-14, walked into the local library as I normally did every week to get another book out, and a book called Napoleonic Wargaming by a chap called, I think it's Barry Hilton, who wrote it, and went up to the counter to give you book in, and they'd stamp it and give you a ticket, and the lad behind the counter, a lad called Sean Wilcox, was a wargamer, and he said, "Oh, you're into gaming?" And I like the social media working in 1979 or whatever it was, and Sean introduced me to a group of guys who he was gaming with, and back home, I'm originally from Cheshire. I know it's Yorkshire Gamer, but I'm originally from Cheshire. And we had a set of lads, and we set a club up, and we used to play massive games in 15 mil, hire out church halls, all that sort of stuff. And then we all went to university and kind of drifted away from that. And I ended up looking in a War Games magazine, finding an advert for Leeds War Games Club, which was where I went to uni, and rang them up. There was no email or anything like that, and ended up as a member of Leeds War Games Club, and I've been a member there now for 32, 33 years, and the majority of my gaming initially was done at the club, and probably about 10 or 12 years ago, I had the opportunity to convert one of the rooms here into a War Games room, and hence Yarkshire Gamer was born. And it started as a blog, just recording the stuff that we'd done, and as you say, it's now gone into a multimedia empire. And a couple of weeks ago, I started a podcast, and that's kind of me up to date, really.
One of the things I did want to ask you then, Ken, is when did you pick up a paintbrush for the first time? I mean, was it straight away as soon as you started gluing these plastic bits and pieces together, or did that take some time to develop?
No, I was lucky in some ways in that although my mum's a teacher or was a teacher, she was an artist as well, and so I was kind of brought up around having easels around the house and having paintbrushes and paints lying around, and just mum, what's that? You kind of learn about colours and that sort of stuff. So I distinctly remember before I'd met Sean, I bought a load of figures from a company called Jacobite and another company called Mike's Models that were doing 15mm at a time. And I'd painted up a load of units for 15mm Napoleonics, some of which I've still got in the cupboard behind me. And they're not bad, actually. So they're not bad. Considering I painted them when I was about 12, they're not bad at all. So yeah, I picked up a paintbrush earlier, very, very early on. And painting is probably the main thing that I do to relax away from, everything else, work and family life and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, looking at the blog and all the other content projects, yeah, it's clear. Yeah, you're really quite a prodigious and prolific painter. I mean, the volumes of stuff we're going to come on to later, but it really is quite, in many respects, quite overwhelming.
Yeah,
and also aspirational as well. But with a wide range of diverse projects on the go, what are you working on at the moment? What's your particular focus?
Well, the months from December through till March are my most organised period of painting, because I take part in something called the Analog Hobbies Paint Challenge, which is now in its 11th year, I think. And it's not a competition as such. It's more of a like a social collective to get everyone through the winter months and paint at the same time, and you kind of gain points for the number of figures that you do. And I plan out a project each year for the challenge, and the Italian War stuff that I'm sure we'll talk about later on came from that. And I've done a big World War II desert project as well. And this year I'm on a 28mm Italian Allied Legion from the Punic Wars, and I'm just looking at it now on the other side of the table, and it's nearly finished. We've got, well, we're second. We've got 19 days to go to the end of the challenge, and I can see 7 bases that need figures to go on, and I know that I've done 2 of those already, so I'm going to get finished in time, which is quite good.
Because your 15mm Kursk project that you did a few videos on the channel, I mean, that almost just seemed to appear from nowhere, almost as if that was a bit of a hobby project tapped on the side and everything else you were doing, and it ended up.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, to be honest, it was. It's not something that any of the other Yorkshire Gamer crew have been involved in. The lads who come here and game regularly, and they were kind of posting, "Where's that lot come from?" And I just fancied in lockdown. I just fancied painting some tanks, and I'm quite. I have quite strong rules in what I paint. I don't do or try to do the same period in the same in different scales. So if I do a period, I'll do it in one scale, and I'll go big in that scale in terms of size. But I won't do ACW in 6mm, 15mm, and 28mm. I'll do it in one scale and go for it. So I've cheated a little bit. I've bent my rules a little bit with World War II, because I've got a massive amount of 6mm 1944 Western Front, and then we've got the 28mm World War II early war desert. So there was a nice slot there between early war and late war, and I've never had any Eastern Front stuff. and I fancied a go at Kursk because it's kind of the last time that there's a bit of a balance to the action. Once you get past Kursk, it's just a couple of German guys with a cigarette and a blunt spoon and 3,000 Russian tanks. So
Yeah.
I've gone for that. And to be honest, until you mentioned it then, I hadn't thought about it for a while because I'd painted it all up, photographed it, did a couple of videos, shoved it in a box under the table, and it's there.
It's in a really useful box somewhere.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I was just laughing at the idiocy of doing the same period in multiple scales.
Yeah.
Who could possibly do something?
Exactly. It's one of the main rules here is that we only do, we're doing a period, we'll just do it in one scale. And that's it. Even if it's 28 mil and we end up getting 2,000 figures and having to, hire out a sports tool somewhere to do a game, we'll do it that way rather than break the rule and go for 6 mil.
Well, I think that's very sensible, and I'm kind of I admire your self-discipline in being able to do it that way. As I consider my 6, 10, and 15mm second mogul collection.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I try to avoid. That's what I try to avoid.
And it's all the scenery as well. Obviously, that's the biggest thing a lot of the time.
Something that I hadn't really thought about before until I spoke to Gareth Lane last week on my podcast about terrain, and he sticks to one scale because a 28mm tree is a 28mm tree for a Viking, and is a 28mm tree for a World War II game. It's a 28mm tree in Napoleonics. If you're buying waddies for the desert, and a mud brick house will last you from the Greek period all the way through to modern day, village in the middle of nowhere in the desert. So sticking to the same scale does, in the long run, save you costs in terms of not multiple purchases for terrain. So there is that bonus to it.
Yeah, it would have been good to know that some time ago.
Yeah.
It's so obvious now you say it, Ken.
Yeah. Well, I've been subconsciously doing that for a number of years, and I'm kind of pleased with myself that I worked it out without realising that I had worked it out.
So, like you mentioned, the Italian Wars, Ken.
Yeah.
Obviously, Gareth Lane, and I suppose in many respects it's connected probably to the work that he's doing around the War of the Roses, and the project that he's working on at the moment. But I mean, what attracted you to that project in particular?
It was, without going all Mills and Boon, it was one of my first loves. No. Strangely, when we first started gaming back in Northwich, there was basically 2 periods that we played, and one was 15mm Napoleonics, and the other one was 15mm Italian Wars. And the lads that I gamed with had masses of figures, and I decided to go in at that early stage when I was starting to game, and I didn't have a lot of money to go into the Napoleonics, and because they needed more for their games, and we had enough Italian Wars in 15mm, and I never really looked at it much again until the Perry figures came out. And I tend to get these germs of ideas in my head about future periods, and they take, I'm very much not an impulse buyer. They take 2 or 3 years to come germ to the surface. And I thought about it and ummed and ahed, and then I was watching, I'd read loads of books on the Borgias in the past, and on sort of that late high medieval, early Renaissance period, when the condottieri was king, and all that sort of Prince Machiavelli and all that sort of stuff just prior to the Italian Wars. And that kind of mixed in then with, we went on holiday to Italy and started to visit the Renaissance palaces and that sort of thing. Yeah. And I just fell in love with the place, really, really did. And then eventually it came to the all right, I'll just buy some. And this is a, if there's a common theme with Yorkshire Gamer, it is let's buy a box of figures and a tank, and we'll do a skirmish game.
Yeah.
And 3 years later, 3 years later, the table here is completely full of 28mm figures, and we're kind of looking at each other going, didn't you just say a skirmish game? So that's kind of what happened with the Italian Wars. And once you get into Italian Wars, I think it's one of the few periods that you just can't do with a small number of figures, because a pike block needs to be a pike block. It's not a pike wedge. It's not a pike splinter. It's a pike block, and it needs to be big. It needs to be massive. Your figures need to be really close together, and you need to look at it. You need to look at it from the other side of the table coming towards you and think, how the bloody hell am I going to stop that? There's thousands in there. I got to the point, what I tend to do with projects, it'll take me 2 or 3 years to go for it. I'll go for it, and then I'll get to 4 or 5, probably 500 figures is what I normally seem to get to a point where I think, right, let's game. And then once I laid the project out on the table, it was I'm not blowing smoke up my backside here, but I looked at it and went, Jesus Christ, that is a good looking army. And it's the color, it's the flags, it's the different types of troops, it's the armor. It is just a fantastic period. It really, really is colorful. And then we started gaming it, and we really, really enjoyed gaming it, because it's one of those, I call it the rock, paper, scissors period. Very much like Napoleonics, in that all the arms within the army are very powerful, but there is something in the other army that will knock it to pieces. So your pike block will smash through any non-pike armed infantry, but you fire artillery at it and it starts looking like a piece of Swiss cheese very, very quickly. And then your massive armored knights run around smashing everything over like 10-pin bowls, and then they run into a pike block and they all get stabbed very, very quickly. So I like it for that reason as well. Some periods you have the tank is all powerful, or like American Civil War, late 19th century, the infantry and the machine gun is all powerful, and your cavalry is just hiding around at the back trying not to get shot. So there's lots and lots of things to love about it, I think. Yeah, very much for me, and I've invested a lot of time and money into it.
Well, I mean, I think of all of your tweets and your blog posts you do and your videos on YouTube, I mean, and it is the Italian War stuff that I really look forward to seeing the most. Visually, I absolutely get it. It looks absolutely spectacular, and and it's not just the fact that you paint very, very nicely. Produce wonderful individual figures, but en masse, it really does just create that sense of scale and spectacle, doesn't it? It's fantastic.
Yeah. I was just looking earlier on YouTube, and the Italian Wars, the Papal Army video, is at 6,500 views, whereas normally I get 300 or 400 views for most of the stuff that I post. So it won the best army in the Analog Paint Challenge a couple of years ago, and it's had quite a lot of outings in other medias and stuff, so it has picked up quite a bit of attention, that army, and it's led me on to writing a book about wargaming in the Italian Wars. So it'll pay a couple of gas bills in the future, all that one.
So if you're stuck on a desert island somewhere doing desert island based stuff, that'll be your last collection that you're left with at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly the collection I'm most in love with at the moment. It really is. It's I'm very proud of it.
No, well, that's fantastic. I mean, I mean, yeah, we talked about the blog, talked about the scale of some of these projects. And one of the things that I found absolutely mind-blowing was when I checked your blog, I noticed that you keep a running tally on there of figures painted. And then also a few months ago, you also did a series of videos, which were just you counting how many miniatures you've got. Which I thought was on the one hand a little bit show-offy and self-indulgent. But then when you've got 28,000 models painted, which is just an astounding number. I mean, it blew my socks off when I saw it on the blog. So what advice would you give to people new to the hobby and about how to approach their first army or first project?
Well, just before I answer that question, Andy, I'll just wind back very, very slightly there with the number of figures, because
well, that number's out of date now.
Well, it is slightly, but there's a little story behind that. I've been a guest on a few podcasts in the past, but I was on a podcast by Andy Chris Breeze a couple of probably about just before Christmas, and we're just chatting away like we are now. And he had a list of questions for me. One of the things he said was, "I've been through Twitter, I've done this, that. How many figures have you got?" And I went, "I haven't got the foggiest clue whatsoever. I just don't know. I've got no idea whatsoever." So we brushed over it and we just carried on talking. And then single malt whiskey tends to make a lot of decisions in my life, and we had to take time off work, and we were in lockdown, and there was nothing else to do. And the wife had gone to bed, and I was upstairs in the games room, just pottering about, doing pointless stuff as you do in the games room. And I was on my second or third glass of Lafroig, and I suddenly thought, that lad asked me how many War Games figures I had, and I don't know. So in a slight peaty, smoky Islay haze of Lafroig, I went 1, 2, and I'd counted them all up. And to be honest, now I've done it, although it was, I did think halfway through it, you're mad, you're absolutely mad, why are you doing this? But now I've done it, it's quite good because I just add to it. I painted 8 velites yesterday, and I just add 8 to the total, and it's also quite useful to see in terms of the different collections how many I've got as well, because I get to, if you look at that video that I did, a lot of my 28mm collections are around 500-600 figures, and that's when I get to that point, and I don't think the project's done, but I will maybe only add 1 or 2 units a year to that project from that point on. So that's the reason behind the 28. That's the reason behind the counting. Malt whiskey as usual.
So that first night of counting, Ken, I've got to ask you, did you actually remember the number that you got up to in the morning, or did you have to start again the following day?
No, thankfully I'd managed to get a spreadsheet going. So as long as I remember to type the number into the spreadsheet, it didn't matter how many I'd had before I carried on.
That's it. So, very well organised then. Very well organised.
So yeah, going back to the original question, because we did dive a little bit. It's a difficult one these days with people starting out. I think these days people are a lot more spoon-fed when it comes to new armies and new stuff. They'll be used to the Games Workshop. They'll be used to buying, like X-Wing and things like that, where you buy a box and everything that you need for that game is in that box, and that's not the generation of gamers that I come from. So whatever direction people go down, this is what I do. I do a lot of planning beforehand, and I will generally look around an historic order of battle, and use that as my shopping list, because that way I'm going to get a historical representation of the unit types and the units that were in an army at a particular time and place, and then move, use that army to then spread out and buy bits and pieces around the side of it. And I can spend quite a long time doing that. And I remember as a kid, I virtually knew, like people would recite Shakespeare's sonnets, and I would recite the Order of Battle from Waterloo. And there was a book, Philip J. Haythornthwaite, Uniforms of Waterloo, and it had a army list in the back, and it had the number of men in the unit and the number of officers and the number of casualties, and I knew that back to front. I couldn't do it now. I couldn't go right, give me the first brigade from Picton's division. I couldn't do that now, but at the time there was no internet or anything like that, so that's how you got your information. So I planned meticulously, and like with the Italian Allied Legion we've just spoken about, I planned that out. And I bought the figures for it, and something I did this time that I've never done before, that I think is, and a lot of people have liked it as an idea, is that I laid out the blank MDF bases for the project.
Yeah.
And then I've left them in the corner of the table, and as I've painted and based them, I've replaced the blank bases with the painted, and I've taken a photograph of it at each stage and done like a little stop motion video of it.
Yeah.
And it really is a good motivator, because when you get to the bit that I'm at now with 7 bases left, it's like I'm gonna knock them out tomorrow. I'm gonna get them finished.
The light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. It's like, oh my god, so that's good. That's the thing. And then for new people into gaming, I think one of the best ways of tackling any project, and for experienced people as well, is to try and do like a group project. One of the group projects we've done here is the Crusades, and the Italian wars as well. You've seen all my stuff, but the lads here have done loads as well. Yeah. And that's just not been on the blog yet, because they've not been able to bring it to the house to game with. And that kind of drives you on. If you've got other people in your close circle of gaming friends or club who are going, look what I've just painted, and you think, shit, I'm going to see that on the other side of the table. I'm going to have to paint something to fight that. And it builds you up, and you do more and more stuff. So I think team projects is another really good way to go for people just starting out on a project.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not to the same extent, of course, but I'm working on the project at the moment with the mate I game with regularly. Hello, Nigel, if you're listening. And we're doing Napoleonics, Peninsular War, which is possibly not something I necessarily would have chosen to do myself, but Nigel was really keen to get it on the table. And it's really nice to actually have that motivation to think, well, actually, somebody else painted, so I better get my brushes out and crack on.
If you try to keep up with somebody, we call it the arms race in here. Somebody will come in and like, oh, I've just painted them this week, and it's like, oh, well, I've painted these, and it does drive you on, and it does get you through a project a lot quicker, I think.
Yeah. So, well, I just want to sort of come back to kind of a point you made earlier as well about what you talked about, I suppose what is commonly referred to nowadays as kind of gateway games. Yeah.
Yes.
And I just wondered if you had an opinion on that. I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, I think that they fulfill a really interesting role in helping people get on board with the hobby. But I can also understand as well that other people might perceive them as being limiting as well. So I just wondered what your view on that was then, Kev, especially given your background and your experience.
You trying to get me in trouble in here?
No, not at all. Have another whiskey.
Not that. No, I haven't had it. All I've had is some Rubicon spring water tonight, so it'll get me into trouble. I think they're a good and a bad thing. I think they're a good thing in that they can bring people into the hobby, and I think that my lad hasn't got into wargaming, but he's more into his D&D and his role playing and those sorts of things. And young people will get they'll get X-wing and stuff like that brings them in, and it brings them into the gaming fold. And I'm more than happy with that. I think that's brilliant. What there seems to be is if you imagine a canyon and you've got pre-box skirmish games on one side that have got fireworks and loads of fancy adverts and rock music in the background. You've got a canyon, and then on the other side of the canyon there's a massive table with loads of 28mm figures on, with some bloke with a torch looking at it, and somebody has knocked that bridge down in the middle. People spend a lot of time and money advertising to get people to play their games, and then they don't, once they're in, they're not pushing them on to harder games. It's not like a drug reference there, doesn't it? But they're not going, now you've played 20 figures aside, how do you fancy playing 60 figures aside? You know what I mean? They're not and we talked about this last week, and how the Two Fat Lardies games are normally restricted to 60, 80 figures aside. And we all decided at the end that if Rich and Nick actually sold figures, that those games will get big very, very quickly. So yeah, I think they're a good way in. I would like to see, and that's the reason why we'll talk about it later on about the podcast, but that's the reason why I'm trying to push big games again, to get people going from that initial taster of gaming with the skirmish games, and aspire to something big rather than to be scared of it.
Yeah, I mean, we've found, again, just referencing my own experience. I mean, as I look at my Napoleonics that are arrayed on the sideboard, much to the wife's delight, what we started off as a sort of a forceful sharp practice has quickly grown, so that we've got the capacity now to start to think about doing bigger games, different types of games. But as you say, there's got to be that kind of underlying desire there to do that and to make that to happen. And as you say, I very much get the point about the fact that so many of these systems are self-contained. They don't encourage that growth. And I think possibly that's something that I wouldn't necessarily say is unique to the historical wargaming, because you can imagine there are parallels in things like fantasy and things like that as well. But it is that kind of willingness to look at different periods, different eras, things that are kind of parallel and related, but also different as well. And maybe you don't get that type of opportunity when you're gaming in something, a construct that's very, very rigid and predefined.
Yeah, I think my experience with that that's put me off to some extent the smaller games is I've invested in I don't know if you remember sci-fi series Babylon 5. Mongoose did a game based around Babylon 5 that was really good actually, and the ships were fantastic. But Mongoose, as they do with everything that they get their hands on, they make it really, really good, and then they drop it after 2 years, and you're left with this box of figures that is just completely useless. And the thing with historical gaming is that if you invest in a series, or if you invest in sharp practice and you buy a load of 28mm Napoleonic figures and they drop that game, those 28mm figures will play any other Napoleonic set, and that's kind of why I think I've stuck almost exclusively to historical, because you never, whatever happens, those figures will be gameable in some sort of game.
Well, A Billion Songs is out now, Ken, and that's only a tenner.
Yeah, that's not happening. That's not happening.
Well, so when you're kind of juggling these enormous projects, I mean, do you tend to be hyper focused on one particular thing, or are you quite happy to move about between projects on the basis that a change is as good as the rest?
Yeah, I'm a lot more. I used to be very unfocused and would paint bits and pieces of stuff and not get things finished. And then there was a period a long time ago now when I was unemployed for a few years, and I painted professionally. And very quickly then you start to, because it's paying your gas bill, you start to concentrate a lot more on what you're painting and getting a lot more organized. So I'm extremely organized when it comes to painting units. I'll pick a unit to paint. So at the moment downstairs I've got 32 Triarii, the last unit for the Legion. I'll paint those 32 and I won't touch anything else until I've finished it, and then I will paint another unit. So everything gets done in units. And then in terms of periods and projects, I will tend to, as I mentioned earlier on, if I start a new project, I'll build it up to 400 or 500 figures, enough to get a decent sized game on the table here, and then I'll slow down and I'll back off with it. And some of the collections here, the two problem childs I would suggest would be the Ancients and the Crusader stuff. And I've gone back into them over 20 years with different units, and I'll get enthused about them. And I did a Kingdom of Jerusalem. I did a Kingdom of Jerusalem mini force for the Crusaders. Really got into that, and I've not touched them since. So, and then I'm into Ancients at the moment. I've been searching for a set of rules for Ancients since time began. And I've got quite enthused by a set called Mortem Glorium, that look really good for the sort of games that we do. And so I'm back on the Ancients again at the moment. And when lockdown ends, the boys will return. And if they say no to Mortem and Glorium, then the Ancients will go back in the box for the 10 years, and we'll start on something new.
So, I mean, just going back then, Ken, to something we discussed before I started recording. I mean, you mentioned these shadowy others.
Yeah.
This cabal that you game with. You kind of have, the joint Yarkshire Gamer identity.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are these people that you've gamed with for a long time? I mean, and do they all contribute to the types of projects that you put together and what we see in your videos?
Most of all the social media stuff's done by me, and we're a collective in that we'll start a project, and it might be something that I've just gone, like the 15mm curse stuff. They've all been looking at a bird in a field over there, and I've suddenly turned left, and they've not realised that I've done it. So there can be projects like that just suddenly come out of nowhere. But what I do find is that we'll get a period, and we'll get a period on the table. So I'm looking at Spanish Civil War at the moment, just over the top of the screen, for a video playthrough I'm doing at the moment. And then we really enjoy the Spanish Civil War. It's one of our favourite games here, and everyone's, even if it's just 30 figures for a company, they've bought stuff so that they have their own figures to game with when they're here. So there's a mix really of that, but they're all people who I've met through Leeds War Games Club, and two of them, Andy and Ian, were at the club when I walked through the door in 1988. And the other two regulars here, Steve and Rob, have come along to the club in the years after that, and just they fit in with our sense of humour, they fit in with our game style, and because it's quite, meeting somebody and playing games with somebody at a club is if you don't particularly like them, there isn't an issue. But once they've entered your house and you've got a ginormous German Shepherd who will eat people if he doesn't like them, then you've got to be careful about who comes through the door. Those boys, and there's a couple of others. There's Harry, bless him, who's he's not very well at the moment, so he lives quite a distance away. So he even without lockdown he couldn't come. And then there's a couple of other people who bob in every now and again. So I think I'm really lucky in many ways. I'm lucky that I've got a big space in a big house. I've worked bloody hard to get the biggest space in the big house, to be honest. But I'm lucky to have such good friends who are friends first and then game second.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's slightly off on a tangent, but one of the things I'd be really keen to do is to get somebody on here who's maybe from America or Canada or Australia, and to find out what their gaming experience is actually like. Because I think one of the things we're very lucky with in this country is just how small it is and how possible it is to meet kind of like-minded people, really.
Yeah, it's a very different vibe in America. There's a guy, Steve Miller, who used to work in the American Army and came to the Leeds club for a number of years, and he's gone back to the States. And he's luckily landed in an area. I think they're all ex-military as well, which helps. Who game at somebody's house, but there doesn't seem to be that club network in America. Like you could go to our club in Leeds War Games Club. We are predominantly historical. So if you were Games Workshop games, then unless you're setting up on your own, you don't really. There isn't anyone else doing Games Workshop games. But then there's at least two others. There's the Night Owls who meet near us. They do more GW stuff. There's the shops. There's a place called Patriot Games in Leeds as well, where you can game. So there's lots and lots of places that you can go who have different sort of things that they do. Whereas in the States, if you go along to your local game store and all they play is 40k and Flames of War, and you don't like either of them, you're kind of stuffed, aren't you?
Yeah, you've got a long way to go before you find
yeah.
So you mentioned moratorium, excuse me.
Yeah.
So when you're putting these projects together, Ken, at what point, I'm going to kind of merge two questions here. At what point do you start to think about the rules? At what point does it become important? But I've also noticed you mentioned your Spanish Civil War video as well, that you're quite happy to put your own rule sets together as well when you can't get something that's suitable or doesn't fit.
Yeah.
So, when do you start to think about rules in that process?
There's, I suppose, a little bit of an explanation before I go into that. And I like to think of people. Do you remember Venn diagrams at school?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I like to think of people as painters, collectors, and wargamers, and those three elements meet together to kind of show what type of gamer a person is.
Yeah.
So I am heavily weighted towards the painter and collector. So the painter and collector for me are virtually the same piece of the diagram, whereas the gaming bit tips into it. So the most important thing to me is the figure collections, the way that they look, and the spectacle of the game. Whereas some people, I've seen this new 2mm thing Mark Backhouse is doing, and the people who game that, I think, are going to have their painter and collection Venn diagrams go further up there, and the wargamer is going to basically be all of it, because I look at it and I think that just looks like, why don't you just use counters? Because you haven't got this. But that's the way my brain works, if you see what I mean. So there's that aspect to it. So when it comes to rules, then I start to look at. I don't buy a set of rules and build an army to it. And I'm quite rebellious in this way. A number of people have laughed at me doing this. Oh, bloody Yorkshireman, bloody. So what I do is I start my collection. I build my figures up. I build my unit sizes up to what I think looks right. I base my figures to what I think looks right, and then we start looking at sets of rules. If we take the Italian Wars as an example, I've got eight 28 mil figures on a 60 by 50 base for the pipe blocks, and that is very tight. But you look at the pipe blocks and you go, oh yeah, that's a pipe block. And then you look at, I'm not going to diss anyone, but you do look at some people's pipe blocks and the figures are so far apart. You think if a cavalry unit charged that, they would be out of the other side and everyone would be dead before you finished. So I want it to look like the historical unit would look like.
Yeah.
I often say I try and paint my medieval and Renaissance miniatures like you can smell them. That's the look that I go for.
The brown.
So yeah. So once I do that, and I start to build my figures up and my armies up, I then start to think about how we're going to play this, and we will normally have a chat between ourselves and think about the rule sets that are available and the sort of rule sets that we like. And this is the great advantage of gaming together with the same people for so many years. We like period specific rules. We like a set of Italian Wars rules. We don't like a set of ancient Renaissance rules that then have two factors in it for Italian Wars. We want, and the rule set that we use, Furioso, it's got some, although that hasn't, no set of war games rules survives contact with Yorkshire Gamer. They always get changed to some extent, but they have like specialized units for mercenaries, and it's all, you read it, and having read and been in the Italian Renaissance building, you get the feel in the Italian Renaissance because it's purely written for that time period. So that's one thing that we look for, and then we don't mind a bit of complication here at Yorkshire Gamer. We don't mind a complicated table. We don't mind a unit sheet for a tank or a unit sheet for a ship. They're very, very out of fashion at the moment. Very, very out of fashion. But I've got a degree in engineering and I can add up. So I'm not scared of a table, and the process is, I don't think of that. A lot of stuff these days, a lot of rules are very, very similar. And there's only so many combinations you can roll the D6. So that's what we look for. And then we will play test maybe 2 or 3 sets of rules, and if that doesn't work, we will normally grab hold of the base of the best bit, but the best rules that we have, we'll nick the base of that, and then we'll build our own set of rules on top of it. And then if we get to the stage, and we do occasionally, where we can't decide what to do, we will dip into the book because that's there as a last resort, but we will tend to write and develop the rules ourselves. And then the rules that we did for Spanish Civil War have migrated into the 28 mil early war desert, effectively the same set of rules with a couple of minor variations, and they will evolve again to the 15 mil Kursk. And a lot of that is around familiarity as well. Because of the big collections that we have, we will normally only game one thing once a year, or maybe twice a year. So you have to have stuff that you know. And when it comes to basing, we just changed the set of rules to fit our basing.
So is that kind of that rules writing process then, or that rules rewriting process you went through then, Kev? I mean, is that is that purely out of necessity, or do you enjoy that as well?
Yeah, well, I very much enjoy it. Very much enjoy it. I'm quite productive in gaming stuff. I do lots of scenarios, and I publish loads of stuff on the blog and everywhere else. So I'm quite productive in terms of stuff like that. So doing a set of rules and thinking about sets of rules, and because they're not going to be commercially purchased, I can just steal bits off everyone else that I like. Yeah, it's not an issue for me. I enjoy that, and then I enjoy the process of play testing them with the guys here as well, because we know what we like, and we like it, like I say, a bit of detail, a bit of complexity, but we like a bit of a laugh as well. So yeah, as I said earlier on, I'm doing this playthrough video for a Spanish Civil War game, which is taking me forever to edit. That's the problem with it. Most of my stuff that I do, the podcast and all the videos I do, if I do a 5-minute monthly update video, it'll have taken me 27 minutes to film it. I just edit the start and the end and stick some photographs in the middle, and that's it. But I've come to do this playthrough, and oh my god, it's taken forever. Do you know what? Oh, you've had Alex on the show, haven't you?
Yeah.
From Storm of Steel. Yeah, I'm gonna have to give him a ring and try and find out how he does it, because he just pumps out these after action reports. Bless him, right, left, and centre. It's like, how'd you do that? It's taken me 4 weeks, and I've still got 3 turns till the end of the game.
You do get the impression though that he just spends every waking hour churning out videos for YouTube, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Because he's quite prolific, but also as well, they're great quality as well. They're always
they're brilliant. They are brilliant.
So they are brilliant. Hats off to him, really.
Yeah.
It's not at all like this Fred Carno's recording over Zoom type business.
It's the way forward. It's the way forward.
So Ken, with all these kind of different aspects of the hobby, then you're involved with, the painting, the model making, the terrain building, all of your work in the media spotlight.
Nowhere near as much as Alex.
How is it difficult to juggle all these different aspects at one time? I mean, do you find there's conflicting pressures sometimes?
No, not too much. I work shifts, which gives me spare time, gives me more spare time than most people, because I'm around in the wee small hours when come home from work. So 2 o'clock in the morning could be most people's 5 or 6 o'clock, and when they're running around doing chores and things with the family, the house is quiet and there's just me there. So and working shifts as well means that I'm working at weekends, and I have days off in the week quite a lot as well, so that there's more time for me. And I'm at that age now where there's just family's grown up and gone to university, so I'm not going to school events and those sort of things. A lot of the time is mine, and I spend it unwisely drinking single malt whiskey and painting figures.
Counting the same figures over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. I've only actually got 13 figures, but I just counted them that many times. I had too much to drink.
So this is kind of bringing us a bit more up to date now, then, because obviously the newest venture is into the podcasting.
Yeah.
So, so I'm going to again try and meld a couple of questions there together. Then, yeah, what made you want to share your hobby with others in the first place? What encouraged you to take the airwaves as you've done?
Yeah, the whole social media thing started probably about 10 years ago, and we just started the gaming in here in the Yorkshire Gamer room and gaming at a friend's house, and I was looking around because the volume and size of games that we were doing had increased. So we needed more ideas for scenarios, and we needed more ideas for periods to do and stuff like that. And I'm always, and this is probably true with the blog, sorry, the podcast as well. I'm always about 7 years behind everyone else. So I suddenly found this thing called the internet, which had been useful for following rock groups and getting tour dates and stuff. But
very popular with the kids, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. So I started to look on there, and I was just gobsmacked. You'd like type in Spanish Civil War scenarios, and this website would come up, and I always remember it's called Steve's Balagan, and it's still on there now, and he's still putting stuff on, bless him. And in there is a huge like encyclopedia of stuff. There's scenarios for all sorts of games, and he'd done a series of Spanish Civil War scenarios for a set of rules called Crossfire, which we weren't going to use because we'd already decided on the writing our own set based around Disposable Heroes, which is an American set of rules. So I stole all that. Shamelessly stole all that. We had a great time, and then about a year later, I started to feel a little bit guilty, and I thought, "Are we doing all this? I'm not putting any back." And altruistic, is that the right word? I wanted to put something back, and I started doing the blog, and that picked up a lot of traction fairly quickly. And I had people asking me to do painting tutorials and scenarios and talk about rules that we were using, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And then as it did, I found the likes of Twitter and Instagram and more recently YouTube. The YouTube channel's been there for 3 or 4 years, but I've only really started to put stuff on in the last couple of years. And I'd started doing the monthly updates, which started off as just something for me, really, just so I'd remember in the haze of single malt, I would remember where I was with projects for the previous month. And those monthly updates are really popular now. It does amaze me how many people tune into the inane ramblings of a middle-aged Yorkshire wargamer. So that kind of built up all those ways. And then I talked about this on the pilot episode of the podcast, and drinking was involved again, I'm afraid. There's a theme developing here, yeah. So if anyone knows any discount codes for single malt whiskey. I had it takes me about an hour and 15 minutes to get to work, so I can have 2.5 hours a day commute, and I'm still working during lockdown, so that hasn't changed. And I found myself I got bored with radio because they weren't playing music that I liked. I got bored with CDs because I had to keep changing my CDs halfway through the journey. And I started listening to talk radio, and I got bored with talk radio, and I really started to get frustrated with it.
It's not good for your well-being.
It's not, no, it's not, because you find that regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, and I would consider myself somewhere bang in the middle, you would have people just come on and moan and moan and moan and moan and moan, and my brain's thinking, oh, just go and bloody do something about it. Don't ring up the radio and moan. Go and, you remember it was President Kennedy, wasn't it, who said, don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Somebody needs to resurrect President Kennedy and get him out there, obviously with a bulletproof shield in front of him, but and get him to tell people, just do stuff. Yeah. So I say I'm getting stressed about it now. I'm not listening to it. So yeah, so I through the YouTube, I came across one of the oddcast, the Two Fat Lardies oddcast. And I thought this is interesting. And I listened to that whilst I was painting, and I thought, oh, I bet there's loads more of these somewhere. And I found podcasts. So as you can imagine, with 2.5 hours a day, 5 days out of 8, for 5 days out of 9, I churned through those podcasts pretty quickly. And I listened to the veteran wargamer, Jay Arnold.
Yeah.
He's probably one of the first ones. He's probably got like 60 or 70 episodes now. And I listened to Sean Clark on God's Own Scale.
Yeah.
And the Wargame Soldiers and Strategy Boys. I enjoyed that. And some of the old Meeples and Miniatures episodes. I know that's finished now, but I listened to some of those.
Well, the archives.
The archives, yeah. And some of Henry Hyde's videos. But of course, with 2.5 hours, I never got to the end of one of them.
No.
And I enjoyed it, and I thoroughly did enjoy it. I don't want to sound massively negative about it, but I did thoroughly enjoy it. But I did find myself getting frustrated because the podcasts were all not anti big game, but it was not mentioned. It was all, and today we're reviewing this new 6-figure skirmish game, and this, and you couldn't do this in 28mm because you couldn't find a tape. And I'm sat there going, well, we do that every other week.
Yeah.
And the underlying current was very much of nobody wants to invest the time to paint big armies anymore. And I thought, well, that am I the only one? There's got to be other people out there, and I do know some, and some of the friends of mine are going to be guests on the podcast who do like war games, holiday centres and stuff. So the big game is still out there, and I spent a month moaning, listening to the podcasts, and then I thought back to the bit earlier on where I was moaning at the people who were moaning at the talk radio, telling them to get off their arse and do it themselves.
Yeah.
And after 2 or 3 glasses of my wife bought me a lovely Irish painted whiskey called Connemara. Lovely, I highly recommended. I need to do a whiskey podcast as well, don't
I? you missed your call in there.
Yeah, I did. So I'd had 3 or 4 glasses of that, and I thought, why don't you just do a podcast about big games, you daft idiot?
Yeah.
And I put a Twitter out about it, kind of suggested it, and went to bed and completely forgot about it. And I woke up in the morning, and like normally, I'll probably have maybe, I don't know, 50 or 60 interactions on a tweet, and this one had got like 170. And loads of people going, oh, Ken, you've got to do this. This is a brilliant idea. And I'm kind of like staring into my coffee and my toast going, what have I let myself in for? So I've kind of shamed myself into doing this podcast. And we've done an episode and a pilot now. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it so far.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. And I mean, what's the response been, Ken, to what you put out so far?
It's been really good. I kind of said in the pilot episode that I would do 5 episodes and see where we were, and see if there was an audience for it, because I'm quite used to talking to myself. So I wanted to make sure that for the podcast, I'd be talking to somebody else apart from myself. So the pilot episode, so the plan with them is I do the pilot episode, and then I've got 5 guests planned for 5 episodes, and I was going to see how it went. As each episode is released, the previous episode will go on to YouTube, and I'll put it up with like pictures from whoever's been the guest. So I put the pilot episode has gone up on YouTube now, and that went up a few days ago. And with the pilot and with the YouTube and the podcast, the pilot episode is over 400 reads now, or listens, which I'm amazed at. I really am. And so I've got to make a decision after I do episode 2, because in true Yorkshire style, I've gone on to a free podcast host. When you get to 5,
that's why.
Yeah, when you get to 5 hours, you have to start paying. So I've episode 2 is recorded on Thursday night, hopefully, and I'm sure unless there's something crazy happens, I'm going to carry on. And I planned out. I just sort of sat down, right, I've planned these 5 episodes. I've been in contact with all the people I want to speak to for those 5 episodes. Everyone said, yep, no problems at all. What do you want to talk about? So I wrote down, I thought, well, how long can I keep this going? How long can I talk about big games? And I just started writing names down and people down, and some only one of them, I'm not going to mention the name because I've not spoken to them yet, is a big shout. The rest are people who I know in the hobby or have been around the hobby for years, and I think would be interested. And what I've tried to do as well is I've tried to stay away from the stock guests. And that's no disrespect to any of them, but you know the Lardies, Henry. There's like a select few who always seem to go on every single podcast, and that's great. That's great, and I can listen to Henry's 2.5 hour introduction many times. But I just wanted to do something different and to bring a different voice to the podcasts, because the people I'm bringing on hopefully are lovers of the big game and will speak enthusiastically about it. And if people listen to it, then there's a chance that people will go big again.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned Sean Clark, because obviously that brings us on to the fact that there are other scales available.
Are there?
So Cameron, does a big battle need to be fought in a bigger scale?
Honestly, I don't think. I hope Sean listens to this, because I don't want him to think I'm having a go.
He'll probably do a repost.
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about that.
He put something up on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and I put, listen, mate, there may normally be 20 millimeters between us, but we are mates over this. So yeah, I like Sean's podcast, and I like it a lot, and it's very, as he's set out to do, it's very 6mm, 10mm orientated, as I plan to be 28mm orientated. But that's the vision of the podcast, if you like. But I don't think, with some caveats, I don't think that scale does make a massive difference to a big game. And we've the definition of a big game, I kind of just put some markers down in the pilot episode, and when we spoke about it with Gareth and Chris in the first episode, different ideas, everyone has a slightly different definition of what a big game is. And I think that's influenced quite a lot by where you come from in terms of your time in the hobby. And I always tell the story of when I was probably 15, 16 and went to my first big war game show. We had a local one in Crewe, I think it was. It was tiny, and maybe 5 or 6 games and 5 or 6 traders, but nothing more. And it was Northern Militaire, and it must have been in the mid-80s. And I remember walking into there and seeing this wonder. It was like a 24, 30-foot table, and you could see the table bowing with the weight of the figures. It was 28mm Napoleonics, and it was just massive, and it looked brilliant, and that's what hooked me. And it was the big game to me is the visual aspect of all of it. It's not the scale of figures, it's not necessarily the number of figures, although to be big it does need to have a reasonable amount, and it's not necessarily the size of table, but it does, to be big it needs to be above average. It's the combination of all of them together. And when it's done properly, and when it's done really, really well, regardless of scale, it looks absolutely amazing. You could be in a museum. The Perry's thing that they did, they've done a couple now. They've done the Agincourt one at the Armouries in Leeds, which is it's a bus ride away from me, so I've been to see that one. And then there's the Gallipoli one that they did down in, I think it was in New Zealand, with Jackson guy who did the Lord of the Rings thing. That's a bloody long bus ride away, so I'm not going to that one. But that standard of game, I defy anyone who's a gamer to look at that and not go, bloody hell, that is amazing. And the modern smaller game doesn't have that. It doesn't have that wow factor from a distance. A lot of people's concept of wargaming, especially during lockdown, is coming from photographs. And you could have a 3-foot by 3-foot table with brilliant terrain and brilliant troops, and you can photograph it in such a way that you look at it and it's a marvel. It really, really is. And then you see it in real life, and it's such a massive letdown. For me, it's such a massive letdown, because I've got to kneel down, which isn't good at my age to start with. Then I've got to put my glasses on. So it's a big game. I prefer them in the bigger scales, because I think it looks better. Photography as well is another one. It's very, very hard to photograph 6mm figures. I've got some big collections of 6mm figures. I've got ACW in 6mm, 4,000 figures, 6,000 World War II figures, and some Napoleonics as well. And the Napoleonics are, again, I'm not blowing smoke up my own, but they're really, really nice. And I can't photograph them. I just really, really struggle. Whereas with 28mm, you can get some brilliant photographs. So
no, sorry, Ken. So I was going to something I just crossed my mind there, mate. So as you move towards more modern eras, then, and you start to develop the concept of the empty battlefield, and you start to consider some of the troop densities and things like the Second World War, where a company of troops was responsible for over a kilometre of frontage, quite often. Does that lend itself to a big battle, or is it really that period of time in which you have got the massed ranks, that massive troops that perhaps becoming less and less of a feature of the modern battlefield?
I think when you're in the large formation eras, it's easier to do a big battle on a smaller table, without a shadow of a doubt. And we've got 12-foot by 6-foot here at Yorkshire Gamer, and the stuff that we do with Italian wars and Napoleonics and stuff, they're pretty big battles. I don't think a 12 by 6 table is that big, but then I've got friends who've got 30-foot tables. So it's this. So when we were earlier talking about your experience develops your perception of what a big game is. So when we do our World War II desert stuff here, that's more of a big skirmish, because like you say, you've got the the bigger ranges and the more spread out troops, and a lot of rule sets compensate for that by knocking the ground scale down massively. The bolt action particularly is one that springs to mind, and we've done that slightly with ours just to make it a little bit more playable. So the compromise is to be made in more modern warfare, and I struggle with the technology in terms of replicating technology with like missile systems and stuff like that. Is very, very difficult to do without making it horrendously boring. I remember a set of modern naval rules that you were rolling for every single bullet in a Gatling gun trying to knock a missile down, and it was like, how many have I done?
They reach the point, as you say, where all this over the horizon stuff might possibly stop any fun on the tabletop. But then thinking also then possibly another definition of big games is also sort of taking it away from that tactical level and thinking about it in the context of the operational and the strategic as well. So is that a big battle too, or is that something completely different?
Yeah, it's the difficult one too, because I'm coming at big battle from the visual representation of it is, I think, is the way I'm coming at it from. If I think about when we did Jutland, that was on a 24 by 8 foot table, but there's only 250 models on. Well, 248 because 2 of them get sunk before the main battle starts.
Only.
So it's 248 ships on a 24 foot by 8 table. So it, 3 pipe blocks next to each other's got more figures than that, if you think about it in that way. But there's no way you can't say that size of the table and those ships weren't a spectacle in themselves. So I think the going big upwards in terms of tactical, you're probably more going into the sort of board gaming thing. And I remember there was a game called, was it Blitzkrieg? I can't remember. I think it was called Blitzkrieg, and it was they'd upped the level, but kept the model numbers really, really small. So one thing you'd say, somebody put a post up on Facebook or wherever and say, here's a picture of my 2nd Panzer Division, and there'd be like 3 models and a couple of blokes on a bicycle. And you thought, that's not. And I have that now where people will post up, here's my bolt action army, and I'm looking at it and going, I've got more figures in my pipe block.
That's not an army. This is an army.
This is an army. So it's something that you could incorporate it into a big battle, but the big game and the big battle for me is about the visual aspect on the table, and that could be a huge game in 6mm, 15mm, 28mm, 54mm, whatever scale that you can be bothered to paint.
No, well, look, then, my final question for tonight, then, and probably a bit of a curveball to you, then. So Kriegspiel is something that seems to be increasingly popular at the moment. Probably due to the work of the Lardies again. But again, what's your view on that in the context of the big battle?
It's not for me. I've seen it and I've watched. I think the Lardies have done some videos on it, and I've watched it, and I've also been involved in some stuff with the military in relation to similar stuff. And earlier on, when I talked about that Venn diagram of the painter, collector, wargamer, the Kriegspiel thing is sitting wholly in the wargamer thing, because you're not painting any figures and you're not collecting massive amounts of figures, and that's where I am. And I look at it and like with the 2mm stuff, as I mentioned earlier on, I look at it and I think, if you're having fun with it, great, but really, I'll go and feed me ferrets and drink some whiskey. It's probably better.
Well, on that note, then, Ken,
I'll go and feed me ferrets.
I'm afraid we didn't mention whippets. I think that was the only Yorkshire cliche we avoided tonight. But look, thank you hugely for your time.
No problems, Andy.
I really, really appreciated it. And also as well, I will include all of Ken's details to his channel and everything in the description of the video. So please make sure that you check him out on all his various modes of communication. But also, Ken, after having chatted over Twitter for such a long time, it's been a great pleasure to meet you tonight. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
No worries, Andy. It's been brilliant. Thanks a lot, mate.